Hello and welcome to another episode of Books Are Burning. I'm Mark Will, author, songwriter, and publisher in permanent exile, currently based on the island of Taiwan. And today I'm joined by Dr. Robert M. Price, who is also an author, and he's here today to talk to us about the works of H.P. Lovecraft, among other things. And I'm going to let Dr. Price introduce himself quickly.
Well, it's great to be on with you. Thank you for having me on the show. I have been interested in both religion and in horror, fantasy fiction since at least adolescence, and never really chosen between them. Even though it gives me a sort of a Jekyll and Hyde persona. On the one hand, these days I am the editor of the Journal of Higher Criticism on the one hand, and Crypt of Cthulhu and Eldritch Tales, and Flashing Swords on the other. I am the host of a podcast called The Bible Geek, and I write pretty ferociously all the time, reviewing books, writing articles about, well, not so much about Lovecraft lately, but I write a lot of stuff on strange passages and problems in the Bible. And I have a mess of books, and one that just came out is called Houses of the Holy, a higher critical survey of the world religions. And I have a few others in the pipeline. And then on the other hand, I'm eagerly awaiting the publication of a 5 volume set of Lovecraft's fiction. And all of it thematically segregated into the 5 volumes. I call it the Lovecraftian Pentateuch, the 5 books, and they are following the format of the call. What the heck did they call it? Oh, Chaosium. Geez, I can't think of it. But I did a whole mess of anthologies over the since the 90s, single author Cthulhu Mythos anthologies, Henry Kuttner, Robert Bloch, Robert E. Howard, etc., and collections of stories centering on individual Lovecraft classic stories, supplying uh, earlier works that influenced that story and then subsequent um, retakes on it by people providing sequels and so forth. And in these books, I would have a pretty detailed introductory essay for the whole collection. And then for each story in there, I would have a shorter introductory essay. And so quite a lot went into it. It's a kind of an annotated uh, approach, but I've not seen Lovecraft introduced in this way. But when you get all 5 volumes, you'll have all of his fiction and most of the, let's say, Cthulhu relevant poetry and the like. So I'm really eager to see that come out. I wrote it up about 30 years ago, but the various publishers dropped out on me, and so finally we're self-publishing it around here. And I'm As to my own position vis-a-vis religion, I am not really a strict theist, but I don't favor militant atheism either. I love and respect all the religions. I take a critical scrutiny of all of them in my analysis, but I favor it rather than oppose it. But I find that to understand it, you have to be willing to criticize it. So I wear at least a couple of hats. And it helps if you have a couple of horns on your head, because each one is, sort of a hat rack. But I always love talking about Lovecraft, and am eager to do so today.
Well, let's talk more about that Mr. Hyde side of things. Lovecraftian Pentateuch. I love that. So, is Mr. St. Joshi involved in this at all? Because I think you had had some contact with him before, and he's actually the editor of the one book of Lovecraftian stories that I myself have read. I'm new to the Lovecraft game. I sort of found my way to him from William S. Burroughs, I guess it was.
Oh,
But I've read the Penguin Classics edition, The Call of Cthulhu and Other Weird Stories, edited by St. Joshi. So is he? I mean, if I'm not mistaken, you have encountered him before. Maybe you
oh,
collaborated with him on something.
yeah, we've been good friends and colleagues for about 40 years now. It's hard to believe, but he is a great guy, great friend, and I've he's published some of my stuff in Lovecraft Studies and so forth. I think maybe I had a story in one of his anthologies, so I can't really be sure anymore. And but I didn't work with him on this. Now he has genuine annotations in the Penguin collections he's edited, and I'm not taking quite that approach. Leslie Klinger does that also, and by that I mean that there are all sorts of footnotes and the like explaining what Lovecraft is talking about with geographical references and hidden biographical parallels between him and his characters, and it's great stuff. And nobody knows as much about Lovecraft as St. does. But
Mm,
this is my, I guess, counterpart to it, where I just deal with, I take Lynn Carter's approach in some of his anthology series by zeroing in on the Lovecraftian contributions of individual authors in the genre, and by zeroing in on particular Lovecraft stories, works that influenced them, and works influenced by them. And so my approach is a bit different, but uh, I think the two approaches complement one another. So he's a great friend and colleague, and his work is always well worth exploring.
okay. Well, I wanted to ask you about what you consider the essential Lovecraftian text. I mean, obviously, whatever you've included in these upcoming editions will clearly answer that question in part. But like, if you had to pick, I don't know, 5 to 10 of the most important tales or stories, which would those be? Yeah,
Well, I
you've
think that
recommended on your recommendation. Sorry, on your recommendation, I recently read From Beyond and Beyond the Wall of Sleep, which I heard you mention on another podcast, but neither of those is in the edition that I have. So, what else do you think is essential Lovecraftian reading?
I believe you could narrow it down, though this leaves out a lot of great stuff. I would suggest the Dunwich Horror, which is my favorite of his stories. Also, The Call of Cthulhu, The
Yes,
Whisperer in Darkness, The Haunter of the Dark, and
yes.
Shadow over Innsmouth.
Okay, several of those are in this edition that I have. So
Ah, good.
I've read at least 3 or 4 of those. That's good to know. Yeah, Lovecraft is often characterized as an author of weird fiction. How do you define that? Do you think that's an apt description of his work, or should we call it speculative fiction, or sci-fi, or fantasy, or horror, or a combination of all those? Like, I mean, that's actually the title of Mr. Joshi's edition here, right? The Call of Cthulhu and Other Weird Stories. What is weird fiction?
Well, I do think that's probably the best catch-all uh, category label, and I think it probably has a lot to do with Weird Tales, where most of the pulp magazine where most of his work was published. But that does neatly combine what Lovecraft also called spectral fiction So there's a kind of ghost story element in it. But the central thing about Lovecraft's distinct approach is uh, what Fritz Leiber pointed out, that Lovecraft understood that in the modern age, you can't just rehearse the old themes like simple ghost stories or crime stories or just science fiction. Well, of course you can. You nobody's telling you can't. But he's
Right.
what Leiber pointed out about Lovecraft was he came up with a kind of Copernican revolution where science is depicted in its dangers not just physical ones like, oh, what happens if the hydrogen bomb goes off, but rather the implication of science for traditional world views and the traditional view that man is the measure of all things. A man is the crown of God's creation. Uh, Lovecraft said science has made it clear we are really flotsam and jetsam in the unimaginable vastness of an empty universe. That we think we're so important, but uh, compared to the dinosaurs who lived millions of years ago, 4 millions of years before we came along, uh, by sheer accident, the meteorite that ruined the climate for the dinosaurs, we inherited the earth and we're essentially just a bunch of lemurs in neckties. And so there is greatness. Like Shakespeare says, how like a god. But when you compare yourself to the vast scheme of things, it's like the psalm says, what is man that thou art mindful of him? And so he tries to press that on, that there is no God, no supernatural. There are unexplained things, but he was a scientific materialist. And in his stories, he paradoxically underlines this by saying, what would the reaction of a naturalist, a materialist, a rationalist like me be in the face of discovering the great cosmic scope of things with our insignificance in the face of it, and seeming supernatural things that show we have only begun to understand what the heck's going on in the world. So the revelations of science, he says in the Call of Cthulhu, threaten everything we thought we knew, and it marginalizes us. And Leiber pointed out that Lovecraft not only did this Copernican revolution, where it's science, not specters, that is the central horror, uh, but that this is, oddly enough, fundamentally religious, not in a theistic sense, but it's
Mm.
like in Isaiah chapter 1, Isaiah sees God in a vision of the temple, and his reaction is not, well, let me get my camera. Rather, it's, woe is me, I am undone. And you realize you're nothing in the scheme of things. And this is the bitter pill we have to swallow. And Lovecraft himself embraced this, and in good humor, oddly. And he said, there is no divine imperative. There's no absolute truth, but there is an ethic. We just have to derive it from aesthetics. What is the beautiful life? What is the enjoyable life? Well, like Epicurus and others, he said, we will enjoy life the more we promote a common world enjoyable by all, and the better we treat one another. Isn't that the pleasant way to go? Isn't that the beautiful way to go? That's good enough as a guide. And ST is really big on Lovecraft's philosophy, and I guess I'm pretty close to it as well. And so this is a whole lot more than you asked for, I realize, but The philosophical insight that permeates Lovecraft's stories, clothed in the language of supernatural alien monsters. It's really symbolism, and he's not trying to propagate his philosophy, but that does seem to be the root of the stuff he's writing to spook you.
Yes, sure. Well, was it this decentering of man, um, this, I don't know, attempt to force readers or the literary public to confront the emptiness of the universe, I guess? Is that what initially attracted you to his work? I mean, I think you've said somewhere that you became interested in his work as an adolescent, and you've been fascinated with it throughout your life. What was it that initially attracted you to Lovecraft?
Well, sometimes it was just the chill of the disclosure of whatever the mystery was. But I think what I has always hooked me is the what he called the artificial mythology that he created with these an idea he got from Lord Dunsany, the great Irish fantasist,
Mm-hmm.
the creation of a fictive pantheon of gods. But in Dunsany, there was a kind of droll, fable like character to it, though he was a skeptic and an atheist himself. But in Lovecraft, he combines it with horror and fear. And nonetheless, it was the idea that there are these hidden, largely unknown gods, or whatever they are, these titans whose very existence is inimical to us. And the system of it, Cthulhu, Yog Sothoth, Nyarlathotep, Shub-Niggurath, Azathoth. This really fascinated me. I'd always loved mythology. I'd always loved comic books and the superhero pantheon. And this really hooked me. Also, the straight-faced scholarly shtick he did, creating ostensibly ancient books like the Necronomicon. Oh boy!
Yes.
As a Bible fan, that was especially interesting to me. It was sort of an infernal Bible kind of a thing, and other writers he knew joined in the game and began creating their old ones, these the great old ones, these space gods, and the grimoires and collections of lore. And I knew it was there. There are some people that think all of this stuff is real, which is a sad delusion. But though I knew it was all fiction, it was all the more interesting for that reason. And I think that was the original hook for me. Later on, I appreciated what it was about his prose that also enchanted me. But I guess it was the mythology, or as they now call it, the Cthulhu mythos, that really hooked me and has never really let go.
Are you a fan of Joseph Campbell?
Yeah, he's sort of a basically a Jungian, and I think there's a
Yes.
great deal to that approach. That why did anybody start telling myths at all? Well, partly was intellectual curiosity in a pre-scientific age. The ancients weren't stupid; they used their imagination to try to figure out, what is the rainbow, or why do we die? Why do we have to work for a living, etc. Uh, but there's also the idea of the hero with a thousand faces. All
Yes.
mythology boils down originally to a kind of set of possible scripts by which to live your life. And are you on a kind of a quest? Well, if you're trying to become anything, if you're trying to achieve anything, you are on a quest. And like whether it's Frodo in The Lord of the Rings, or Siegfried, or Odysseus or whatever, you're trying to achieve something. And so that will be heroic if you get off your butt and start trying to do it and to become what you potentially are. And so that element of mythology, while not really paramount in Lovecraft, certainly is in a lot of the other stuff, the heroic fiction of Robert E. Howard and Lynn Carter and Carl Edward Wagner and so forth. And I love all of that stuff. That element not so prominent in Lovecraft, but yeah, I think Campbell had his finger on the pulse there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Let's back up and talk about the Necronomicon again, because some listeners might not be clear um, about what exactly this is.
Yeah, Lovecraft created it as a prop, which he used in various ways in various stories, so that sometimes the Necronomicon appears to be a kind of a cult Bible, promoting and expounding the lore of the old ones, and perhaps with rituals and so forth in there to summon them up. But sometimes it appears to be like a medieval demonology, a kind of guidebook warning you what to stay away from. And
Mm-hmm.
so it depends on what he wants to use it for, and you can't really harmonize all of it. But who cares? He didn't
Right.
write the stories to expound the Necronomicon. He's just using it as a prop and to say different things.
Well, and as with, other aspects of his stories, the vagueness of it heightens the uncanny, I guess, horrific nature of it too, right? Because it's
Bingo.
unknown, because we don't know exactly what it is, it's kind of sketchy. That quality creates more of the feeling of horror and dismay, I guess. I mean, when you think about the actual name, though, necro, that's death, right?
Hmm.
Nomicon is somehow related to law, I guess, right? If we're looking at the Greek roots. So I think in one story I saw that it was attributed, the authorship was attributed to some um, Arabic magician. Is that like standard, or is he consistent with that, or
Yes,
does
that's
the
right.
even the author? Okay, so there is
Yeah,
a
Abdul
specific author.
al-Azra.
Okay, okay, and yet
That
he
was the
he
name he
chose
gave
this.
himself when he was a kid and reading the 1001 Arabian Nights. He playfully considered himself a Muslim for a while and coined the name Abdul al-Azra for himself. And then, years later, he decided, well, what better name for the author of the Necronomicon? Necronomicon itself is probably, it came to him in a dream, and he was a precocious classicist, and no doubt, and he was big into astronomy, and so he must have known about the ancient work, the Astronomicon by
Hmm.
Manilius. And that had to be in his mind. And he thought it meant, I mean, he knew some Greek, but not as much as S.T. Joshi does. And
Okay.
Lovecraft thought Necronomicon, which he didn't, intentionally create. It popped into his head in the dream. He figured, well, I guess it means something like image of the laws of the dead. But
Yeah.
St, who is fluent in ancient Greek, says, no, no, it has to mean simply concerning the dead. The ick part of it is just adjectival.
Adjectival. Yeah. It's not icon. In other words.
That's right.
Uh,
He thought it
yeah.
was, but by the analogy with the Astronomicon, no, because Astronomicon just meant it was like the suffix so and so ical, astrological, and
Right.
so
Right.
on. So he figured it meant the one thing, but it has to mean concerning the dead, and
Concerning
which
the
is pretty
dead.
good too.
Hmm. Just the root. gnome is, I mean, in Greek, that's related to law. So I thought it was
Namas,
like
yeah.
concerning
But that it's like a
the
false
laws of the
cognate.
dead. What's that?
It's like a false cognate. It
Ah,
comes in this case. It comes from nemo, concerning, and
I see.
so. But he didn't realize that himself. It's just that we do have this analogous title, which we know. You know, we can. It gives us the clue to breaking it down, what it would
Right.
mean if it were a genuine Greek title.
So it came to him in a dream, and of course, dreams are very important in his work. But I noticed today reading From Beyond and Beyond the Wall of Sleep, he's something of an anti Freudian, which surprised me. I don't know why, but he speaks rather disdainfully of the Freudians. Any thoughts about that?
It's hard to know whether he actually. Well, I'm sure he gets into this in his letters, which I am regretfully only superficially acquainted with. Uh, but in these stories, he will often refer to accepted science and in a tongue-in-cheek derisive way, because he's trying to say, oh no, we think we're so smart, but in fact the truth of the matter is shocking. It's not just brain chemicals when you dream. It's not just the subconscious. You may be in touch with something much more vast and frightening. Like in the Call of
Mm,
Cthulhu, people start having dreams of the return of the old ones, and it turns out, of course, Cthulhu himself is dreaming in a kind of torpid state in the sunken city of Rillier, and he's preparing the way for his return by sending out dreams to those who are psychically sensitive. Well, he didn't think that was what dreams were, but it's just for the sake of the story. He says, "Oh, you think it's just what Freud or Jung says? You don't know what you're talking about. I wish you
right.
did, but the truth is much worse." So I don't happen to know whether he really accepted Freud or not.
Yeah. Well, here's a controversial question. A lot of attention in recent years has been given to Lovecraft's alleged racism. I know that Mr. Joshi has spoken on this too, but do you have any comment on that? I mean, is it, I think it's pretty well accepted that he had what we would consider racist views personally, and maybe some of those are reflected in the work. But how do we wrestle with that issue? I mean, is that something you're concerned about at all?
Actually, not. There's this, I guess the term for this is presentism, where we feel, at least the woke folks feel like that we know everything, and and there's no excuse for the people of the past not knowing it. And I think that is, well, C.S. Lewis called that chronological snobbery. And
Mm,
it's like, are you really going to hold it against the Bible writers that they thought the sun uh, revolved around the earth? I mean, what else were they supposed to think at the time? It was just common quote knowledge. They were wrong. Big deal. And in the same way, Lovecraft, he wasn't like a member of the Ku Klux Klan or something.
right.
He said things about Jews and blacks that are disgusting to us today, but he thought this was science. He had these kind of stupid sounding anthropological views. And the way you can tell that's all it was. It was that in his personal dealings, we have a lot of accounts of Lovecraft from people that knew him in great detail. He was apparently uniformly compassionate and cordial, and to everybody. His wife was Jewish. He
Yes.
and so forth. He had one of his best friends, Sam Loveman, was a Jew. He didn't despise these people. It didn't matter to him. He seemed to take people as persons. And if you asked them, well, what do you think? Are Northern Europeans better than Southern Europeans in some ways? He'd have said, well, yeah, but it was usually the culture that, of course, he's probably wrong about that too, but
Right.
his views were like if you have elderly relatives that grew up before the civil rights struggle. It
Mm.
wouldn't be. I mean, I've had such relatives. They you can't exactly blame them. They just imbibed what was in the air at the time, and you just
Hmm.
have to be grateful when some people saw through it. And in some measure, Lovecraft was beginning to see through it, but there's no denying his opinions were racist. But he wasn't a hater, as near as we could tell. And even some of the stuff he said, bemoaning that Portuguese and Italians were swarming into Providence. It was kind of like what Jimmy Carter ill-advisedly said during his campaign. That he said something like, "Well, I believe it's okay for a neighborhood to try to maintain its ethnic purity." Oh, I wouldn't have said that, but
Yeah.
that incredible as that may be, that was what Lovecraft was saying. He loved the old colonial era and all that stuff, and he was seeing that pass away. He hated modern architecture for the same reason. Does that make him a bigot? Because in his mind, it was all the same thing. So it's like it's not like he's saying the stuff in his work that if he said it today. And it's just really an anachronism the way people expect him to have anticipated the future.
Mm. Chronological snobbery. I like that.
Yeah.
Presentism. Very good. Well, let's talk a bit about his background. Like, he is a child of New England and specifically Providence, Rhode Island. I mean, um, how do you think that? Obviously, I mean, his I guess like Faulkner's Yaknapatawpha County. You know, his world that he has created is set in New England, specifically around Providence. I think the town or community is called Arkham. Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
So what relation does that have to the actual Providence, or how do you think that influenced his work? I mean, I think it's probably pretty important.
Oh, yeah. The two stories in particular in the Dunwich Horror, he really effectively portrays well that and the picture in the house. Uh, in these, he shows how in the remote, isolated parts of New England, it's not genteel. It's not the kind of thing you would think of in connection with New England. There's weird stuff going on there. Inbreeding and incest and superstition and so forth. And but then when he deals with Arkham, which he places in Massachusetts, it's really supposed to be Harvard, I think. Uh,
Oh,
in
okay.
that he sees it as a center of the best of our civilization's learning, which, however, gets exposed as woefully inadequate once these horrifying revelations become apparent. But you can tell he loves and respects it. And the classic case of this is his novel, The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, which is set in Providence. And it's, as Don Burleson, another great Lovecraft scholar, said, that it's almost as if Providence is the main character in the case of Charles Dexter Ward. All the
Hmm.
lore about its earliest inhabitants and its heritage, its architecture. He has things happen in buildings he actually knew. And in fact, you can go to Providence during one of these Lovecraft conventions, and they have tours of places Lovecraft described, including the Charles Dexter Ward mansion. which they don't call it, of course. But there's several places where, or the First Baptist Church of Providence, things happen there in Lovecraft, and he so it's he loved it. And when he moved to Brooklyn, when he was married, he tried to adjust to that and did get some mileage out of it, made friends there, visited the Roerich Museum and so on. But he began to find it oppressive. And when he broke up with his wife, he moved back to Providence, and he recounted the way he felt on the train as he got closer and closer to his true homeland. And
Mm.
uh, he was back there now, and he says something about, do I love Providence? He says, gentlemen, I am Providence. And that's what it
Mm.
says on the gravestone. Though he didn't, his family didn't put it up. That was put up in the late 80s by Lovecraft fans. But yeah, he said, I am Providence. And you find that spelled out in the case of Charles Dexter Ward.
Is that his only novel?
I know there are, oh, at least, well, there's that. There's the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, which caps off his cycle of dream world stories that are all in the vein of Lord Dunsany. And
Mm.
So there's that. Then there's At the Mountains of Madness, which is his longest piece, and that is just chock full of all kinds of paleontology, and he was a real fan of science in all forms, and so he packs it with that, and it has to do with a an early expedition to explore Antarctica, and that they find the remnants of an alien civilization there. It's really fascinating, and that's his longest. And Charles Dexter Ward is almost as long. Kadath is a bit shorter, but those are the longest he wrote, and he never even sought publication for Charles Dexter Ward. He didn't think
Mm.
much of it and just stuck the handwritten manuscript in a drawer to to be discovered after his death, and it is a masterpiece. And
I,
but they all are. They're all very different. He was just a polymath in many ways.
mm. I was about to ask about the publication history because most of the stories were published, as you intimated, in pulp magazines like Weird Tales, right? Like
Right. Oh, yeah.
did he ever was he ever published by a mainstream publishing house, or was he always just I mean, I think I read that he never was able to support himself with his writing, but like what's the publication history? Is it always Was it always through these pulp magazines?
Yeah, and before that, before he dared to venture into that, he published some of the stories, shorter ones, in amateur journals. That he was in these clubs, the United Amateur Association, and another one, forget what it was. But the United, yeah, the United, and the other one I can't remember. But you'd have a small group of dilettantes who were producing their own tiny circulation, but beautifully rendered magazines, journals, etc. And he did too. And he had various stories and essays in his own and in friends' amateur journals. Then he got into weird tales, amazing stories, strange stories, etc. And he sought publication of a collection with Alfred Knopf. But they didn't
Mm.
buy it. And he forever after ridiculed them by speaking of a bunch of sort of the savage, degenerate Eskimos as the Nafkes. And
Mm.
but he didn't get published in book form, and that's why Arkham House was created by August Derleth and Donald Wandry after Lovecraft's death, because they said, look, this guy's reputation is going to vanish if these are not preserved outside of for God's sake, pulp magazines. I mean, they're going to rot. And so
Yeah.
they started Arkham House with a mammoth collection, The Outsider and Others, followed up by another one, sort of like the Mishnah and the Tosefta in Judaism, another one, Beyond the Wall of Sleep. And then later on, they broke it up into various books, like I'm doing, basically. And
Hmm.
these sold slowly, but other publishers eventually caught on, and Lovecraft has become amazingly well known today. He would never have believed it if you could tell him what was going to happen in the future.
Right. I mean, there are even TV shows and movies based on his work. I'm sure that never would have occurred to him.
He thought that there might be movie interest, but he tried to make it clear he did not want movies based on his work because he
Oh,
knew what would happen, that they would stink, that since he didn't try to have important characters, that wasn't what he was trying to depict. They were just
right.
framed for the reader to experience the illusion of natural law being suspended, etc. How are they going to do that in a movie? You're going to have a
Right.
protagonist and all. I say, please, no movies. He was pretty much vindicated. I happen to like a few of them Lovecraft movies, but I have to admit that you can't really do a faithful adaptation.
Which one would you recommend? I don't know that I've seen any of them. What's the best of the lot?
Let's see. My favorite, I guess, would be the Dunwich Horror from, I think it's 69 or 70, and closely followed by Die Monster Die, which is loosely based on The Color Out of Space. And
Hmm.
after that, The Haunted Palace, which is a Poe title. They're trying to take advantage of Roger Corman's Poe series, but it's based on the case of Charles Dexter Ward. I really like those, as hokey as they are. Uh, as for the ones today, uh, I I guess the best one is probably The Color Out of Space that came out just a few years ago with Nicolas Cage. And
Okay.
he's pretty good in that. I mean, sometimes he's just a clown, and like in
Yeah.
the horrible Ghost Rider movies. God, it's like he's one of the Three Stooges. But in this, he comes off kind of like Jack Nicholson in The Shining, somebody who is
Okay.
gradually turning insane from being merely eccentric before. And I kind of like that one. I think it's well done.
Okay. Well, I mean, it sounds like he was a true indie author. I mean,
Yeah,
self-published, um, no compromising with publishing houses. He did it his way. That's
right.
certainly commendable.
You are so right, because when he was negotiating with Farnsworth Wright and Edwin Baird, the editors of Weird Tales, he said, "Now I got to stipulate that not one word be changed, or the deal's off." And they kind of
Yeah.
chuckled and but agreed, and largely they didn't corrupt his texts. But that shows just what you're saying. No compromise.
Good, good. Another question occurred to me as we were talking about his New England background. Do you think there's any way we can connect him to the tradition of the transcendentalists? Like, I mean, is there any line that can be drawn between, say, Emerson and Thoreau and Lovecraft, or is that taking things too far?
It doesn't seem to me to click really. They they started a trajectory that wound up in New Thought and Christian Science and so forth, and there was this implicit or explicit pantheism with the oversoul and all that, which
Hmm.
I think Lovecraft uh, really didn't sympathize with, because for him there is no glorious unity in the cosmos, though the Though, as Fritz Leiber said, there is an essential religiosity about that, though Lovecraft wouldn't have called it that. I wrote a long essay once called Cosmic Fear and the Fear of the Lord, Lovecraft's Neglected Religious Vision. He wouldn't have called it that. He didn't, but Leiber is correct. It's exactly like Rudolf Otto in his classic book, The Idea of the Holy, where he speaks of the primordial, he called it numinous religious experience, the encounter with the capital H, holy, which has two sides to it.
Hmm.
It's you experience the mysterium tremendum, the
Yes.
mystery at which we shudder, like Isaiah, woe is me. But the simultaneous mysterium fascinans, you can't look away. And that's because this mystery offers you the fulfillment that you lack as a finite creature. And that really is central to Lovecraft and even the mythos thing. It's the vastness of the universe that has the same function as the greatness of God in conventional religion, though he didn't deify it. He was a naturalist, but functionally it's the same thing.
Yeah, there's still the sense of awe and
Yep,
wonder,
exactly.
but but as you say, it's a more horrific vision. It's not the benevolent kind of comforting vision that we might get from Emerson, for example.
Yeah.
I just thought maybe, having grown up in that environment, certainly he would have been exposed to it, but maybe he was reacting against it more than like seeing himself as a successor.
I
Let's
suspect so. I
you got,
really need to read his letters about that, but I that seems right to me.
yeah, that would make sense. Let's shift quickly to the Dr. Jekyll side of your literary activities. I've not read it yet, but it's on my list. I would definitely like to read The Case Against the Case for Christ. Can you tell us about this book that was published in 2010? Like, how did you? I know you have a theological background in New Testament Greek, and maybe you were raised in the church as well. Can you walk us through that journey? How did we arrive at the writing of this book?
Well, I always uh, jokingly suggest that I might do an autobiography one day called I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist. And I certainly was. And I eventually got into Christian apologetics. I remember the afternoon at a church youth group thing where we had some slideshow about this guy saying, "Well, really, it's very you can prove virtually that Jesus rose from the dead, and if that's the case, what he said about himself being the Son of God must be true. And see, you can prove this to unbelievers." I thought, holy mackerel, really? I just was
Yeah.
content with faith as a kid. But the more I got into that over the next few years, on into college and beyond, I came to realize this became much more important to me then. But the more I got into it, I found that I'm not sure I would find this convincing if somebody were making this case to me. And then I realized as I am reducing this to a more or less plausible or probable theory, this isn't faith anymore, and I can't rest content in it. And so I began to read other critical scholars, and I realized I had only been given one side of the story. And I began to read omnivorously various non conservative theologians, Paul Tillich, Friedrich Schleiermacher, Rudolf Bultmann, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and their
Mm,
approaches to the Bible. And it began to make much more sense to me to say the Bible isn't an inspired oracle from God. It's got human fingerprints all over it. That's why it
mm,
has real contradictions in it and so forth. Well, skipping ahead, I wound up eventually saying, I can't really buy this conservative Christian thing. That doesn't mean there's no God. And I continued to pursue that. And eventually I wound up finding the Bible more fascinating than ever. And the tools of form criticism and historical criticism and so on made it alive. And just like a classicist views Homer, it wasn't like for personal edification, though I've never stopped appreciating the wisdom that's in the Bible, but it's human wisdom. And so I got deeper into the Bible. I got a doctoral degree in New Testament, and actually a dozen years before that, I'd gotten one in theology. And so I loved all of that stuff, but I could no longer really believe in it. And so I write a lot trying to solve puzzles and things in the Bible, and to show that its supposed champions, are really in effect its worst enemies, and that
Mm.
I say I am the champion of the Bible because I love it for its own sake and want to understand it, let the chips fall where they may. And so I've written a bunch of books, but this particular one, it's a reply to Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Christ, which it poses as a journalistic set of surveys with Christian
Yes.
scholars, which it is not. It's a guy that got converted to evangelical Christianity because his wife was, and
Mm.
then he began to interview well-known Christian apologists or spin doctors. And so he's saying, well, this is what convinced me, and maybe it'll convince you. And that wasn't true. But I thought here were all the flimsy arguments that I had to repudiate long since. And I knew people that had said, hey, I read this great book, The Case for Christ, and I read it and said, oh my God. I said, I don't know who's ever going to read this, but I got to write a reputation of this. And I
Uh,
didn't call it The Case Against Christ because I wasn't making one of those. I
yeah.
was criticizing this bogus defense. And
Yes.
luckily, a lot of people have read it. And I write other stuff in that vein, but this was I tried to be even tempered in it, though it's a little hard not to get sarcastic with some of this nonsense.
Yes. I can
But
imagine. The reason
uh,
I know about it is because my fundamentalist father tried to get me to read it years ago.
aha.
So, so yeah, I recognize the title. I'm gonna have to read that at some point, and if possible, maybe have you back on the pod to discuss that in more detail. Looks like a fascinating read.
Oh,
At
that'd
the
be a lot of
moment,
fun.
oh, I'd look forward to that. But yeah, let me read it first. At the moment, I'm reading Murarescu's The Immortality Key, which is basically arguing that Jesus is the new Dionysus, right? Like he's the updated version of the Mediterranean, well, not only Mediterranean but Near Eastern god Dionysus, and early Christianity took what he considers the psychedelic rituals of Dionysian worship and, just basically imported them into, basically retranslated them into Christianity, but they took the same rituals. Like the Christian Eucharist is just a continuation of the Dionysian wine drinking, which he argues was spiked with psychedelics, as a certain drink at Eleusis in Greece was also probably a beer that was spiked with psychedelics too. So, um, wonder
Yeah, I
what
find that
Mister.
unpersuasive so far, just the psychedelic part. It's not implausible, but I don't think I've not yet seen any real evidence for it, though I'm not embarrassed by it. It's kind of a revival of John Allegro's The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, which is
Exactly.
universally reviled, but I think unjustly. But I think that could be, but I definitely think the Christian Eucharist comes from Dionysus and Osiris, and because of the grain gods and grape gods, and so the wine is the blood of the grape, and therefore of Dionysus and Osiris, or the beer, same thing, and the bread, of
Hmm.
course, there's the grain god. I'm convinced of that.
Hmm. Well, it's interesting you mention Allegro because I just read his book as well. For whatever reason, I'm on this, psychedelic roots of Christianity jag. There's another book
Yeah,
called
fascinating. Bravo.
The Psychedelic Gospels by this husband and wife team, the Browns. But anyway, yeah, Allegro. I'm not sure I can agree with all of his etymologies, but he's certainly a brilliant scholar. I mean, some of them seem like is really every word. Um, does every word that we know of mean mushroom and or penis or it's it's I don't know, it's strange credulity in a way, but it's a fascinating read, and there's something there. And I don't know, I'll let you know after I finish with Murarescu what my verdict on that is. But the Browns
Great.
in the psychedelic gospels make a pretty good case for, you know psychedelic rituals in early Christianity. They look at some of the frescoes and artwork, which seems to clearly depict, the Amanita muscaria mushroom.
The
But
huge one with the snake and Adam and Eve to the sides.
yeah, that's the
Yeah,
one.
that
Yeah,
is
but there,
really a shocker.
yeah, but there are others. There's another one. Can't remember what it's called. I'll put it in the show notes. But something like Christ and the plants, and then he's surrounded by all these mushrooms. I mean, they're clearly mushrooms. They're not like flowers or.
Oh,
So
oh
yeah,
boy.
that's another one worth exploring. But I mean, you say Allegro is universally reviled. Do you think that's unjust, or do you think he's been given his day in court and it just doesn't hold up?
I think it's the former. I mean, I certainly am not competent to judge him on etymology, but it seems to me like one thing that really hits me is what he says about uh, Boanerges, or however you want to pronounce it, with James and John. And he says that this looks like uh, another version of a hypothetical Sumerian word, not actually attested, but it would be just an unattested version, an unexampled version of a word that ought to exist, meaning in their, I'm saying this stupidly, but the that if you switch the suffix and the prefix, which you could do in all these Middle Eastern names, it's
Yeah.
interchangeable, you get Geshpu Anor, upholder of the vault of heaven. And James and John are the sons of Zebedee. They're brothers. They're like Castor and Pollux, who are the sons of the thunderer Zeus, and so forth. And that struck me as making so much sense. I've
Hmm.
and the fresco thing that was so astonishing. I think there's got to be something going on there, but I think it's just so unconventional that the mainstream is poo-pooing it. I
Right.
don't know that he's absolutely convincing or that he proved his case, but I don't think he can be just should be just shrugged off like they do.
Well, yeah, and in my edition, the afterword, I guess it was written by Dr. Carl Ruck, whom I know
Oh
you've
wow!
interviewed. So I'm actually trying to interview Dr. Ruck as well because I want to know because he knew Allegro personally, and I'm just curious to hear what he thinks about it. I've also tried to
Oh,
get in touch with Murarescu because in this 400-page book, Allegro is not mentioned at all. So it's
uh,
it's kind of strange that I mean, the thesis of his book is that there is what he calls this pagan continuity hypothesis, right? Like this, he, I think the whole point of it is to prove the pagan continuity hypothesis that the Dionysian ritual was transformed into early Christianity. And so to not mention Allegro at all just seems to me strange. And I wanted to ask him, like, why? Like, why? Like, has it has he been completely discredited? The authors of the psychedelic gospels did mention him, and they seem to like agree with most of his conclusions, although they don't believe that they don't agree with him that there was no historical Jesus, right? They believe there was, whereas Allegro doesn't. He thinks it's all just like an allegory uh, for the mushroom sex cult or whatever. But they seem to respect most of his other work. But I will say there are quite a few forms, etymological forms with asterisks, right, indicating a reconstruction. So
Ah,
there's no documentation for it. There's no papyrus or even like cuneiform tablet with these forms, but he's offering them as reconstruction. So a lot of it is pretty speculative, but it's a brilliant undertaking at a time when people would have assumed he was crazy, but they couldn't deny his authority because he was one of the experts on the Dead Sea Scrolls
yep,
after they were discovered, right? So I mean,
that's
the
right.
guy's not a fool, but it was just not that like the times were not ready for that idea. But now I just want to know what these current experts think about his work today. And so that's a question I will continue to explore.
Hmm.
But as I think I mentioned in email, I'm working on a translation of the gospel according to Mark for no other reason than because it's Mark and I'm Mark. I've done a translation of Aeschylus's Persians, and so this will be my
Ah,
second translation from the Greek. But what do you have any insights on the Gospel according to Mark? I know that most scholars believe that was the first one written. It's the most primitive, the most basic kind of journalistic version of the Jesus narrative. Like, what are your thoughts about Mark?
I do think it was the earliest one, but I still think it was probably a second century work. In fact, let me email you my introduction to Mark that was in my book, The Pre-Nicene New Testament. It
Oh,
goes into a lot,
yes.
yeah, more detail than you could stay awake through if I went over it here. But yeah, I think that it was the first one, but I think there are a bunch of clues to it being a lot later than people think. And apologists like to make it as early as they can
Oh, yeah.
to
Right.
minimize the telephone game aspect of it.
Yes. Interesting.
Boy,
Yeah, I would love to see that. That would be very useful background reading for me as I make my way through the text, which is it's Koine Greek is basically like basic English today, It's like um the kind of ESL version of ancient Greek. I mean, comparing the text of the Gospel according to Mark to the classical Greek of Aeschylus, like it's so much easier to work with, right, and to try to translate. So much
mm.
simpler, more basic.
Before I forget, as I'm about to, have you looked at Dennis MacDonald's book, The Dionysian Gospel?
No, I haven't, but I just read about that today in Murarescu, and I noted it down.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And he also, well, he shows, though he's not the first, nor does he claim to be, to show it the influence of the Bacchae on the Book of Acts is really
Yes.
significant. And there's uh, Dionysus becomes Paul in that, but it's also very obviously the prototype for Jesus. Like when Dionysus is explaining what he's about to do to Pentheus, he says, "Well,
Mm,
something to the effect of, well, he can dish it out, but we'll see if he can." Stand up to this. So he says he's persecuting my maenads. We'll see how he likes it when I hypnotize him into becoming one of them. It made me
mm,
think of what the risen Jesus says to Ananias. He says that he's about to convert Paul, and he says, I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. And I think,
mm,
is that a kind of malicious irony like that of Dionysus? Because there's
mm,
so much else in Acts that comes right out of the Bacchae. And that's a fun thing to explore. And that's a major piece of the puzzle in terms of this continuity thing.
mm. Yeah, I'll have to read that as well.
And
Well,
yeah, one other thing. Yeah. Are you
yeah.
familiar with David Hillman, also known as David Ammon?
No, I don't think so.
He
Tell me
is
about him.
one wacky guy. He poses as the great, uh, well, he was a student of Karl Ruck, but
Uh-huh.
he has a kind of Satanist cult, though it's kind of a shtick. But he appears. He's got a show online, and he really sounds like he's gone off the deep end. And he believes that all kinds of weird stuff with Jesus and drugs, and that Jesus was involved in pederastic rituals when they nabbed him in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I think it's like hopeless bunk, but
Hmm.
it does bear on your topic, and it would be worth looking him up and seeing what he has to say. And he was a student of Ruck's, and Ruck really wants nothing to do with him. He doesn't want to be
Oh,
associated with him now.
oh, really? Okay. Well, if I can snag that interview with the good doctor, I'll ask him about that among other things. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. This has been a fascinating conversation. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh,
Is
what a
there,
delight.
well, thank you, thank you. Is there anything you would like to plug besides the Lovecraftian Pentateuch? Any
Well,
other
if anybody's
projects?
interested in the world religions, this my book on that just came out. Houses of the Holy, a higher critical survey of world religions. I'm pretty proud of that, and I think you'll find in it a lot of material you will never find in most of these introductions to world religions. And I have a collection coming out, a fiction collection called Tales of the Derleth Mythos, and all sorts of other wacky stuff. You can look me up on Amazon, and you'll find all kinds of stuff. And I am the same guy that wrote the Bible books, who did the Lovecraft books. Sometimes people
Right,
say, "What?"
right.
Oh
What's
boy.
the best place to follow you? Is it the Mind Vendor website or your Amazon page? Where would you like me to send people?
Well, both of them actually, because the Mindbender thing is largely an archive of all kinds of columns and reviews and sermons and stuff, whereas
Hmm.
the Amazon page is probably better to see what's available by me and what it's about.
Okay, great. Final question. Are you a Led Zeppelin fan?
Actually, not. There's one or two
Oh,
songs I like, but I just couldn't resist the stealing the title.
okay. Well, it's a great title.
There's
All
two
right.
other books with the same title on Amazon. I should have realized there would be, but
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. Yeah. Probably. Yeah. Probably quite a few. It's the subtitle that has to distinguish it from
hmm,
the others, I guess.
bingo. Yeah.
All
Oh,
right.
good.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. This has been Books Are Burning. My guest has been Dr. Robert M. Price. Follow him at mindvendor.com. We'll put that in the show notes. And check out his Amazon page. See you next time.
You
Farewell.
bet.